There is a dog asleep somewhere near you right now, or there was today, and you have been told your whole life where it came from. The wolf. Everyone knows this. The dog is a tamed wolf, the friendly descendant of the gray wolves that still howl across the forests of the north. It is one of those facts so widely repeated that no one stops to question it. It is also wrong. Not slightly wrong, fundamentally, structurally wrong, in a way that took the reading of ancient DNA to uncover. Because when scientists finally extracted and sequenced the genomes of wolves that died tens of thousands of years ago and lined them up against the wolves alive today and the dogs sleeping in our homes, they found something nobody expected. The wolf you picture when you hear the word the gray wolf of Yellowstone, of Siberia, of the fairy tales, is not the ancestor of your dog. It is something closer to a cousin, and the true ancestor, the actual animal that became the dog, is gone, vanished. A ghost lineage that no longer exists anywhere on Earth. The story of the wolf is not the simple story of a fierce predator that we slowly tamed into a pet. It is a far stranger and darker tale of a vanished ancestor, a near total extinction, and a creature that has been hunted, mythologized, and misunderstood more than almost any animal in human history. The wolf we think we know is a survivor of a lost world, and the dog at your feet is the echo of a wolf that no longer exists. This is what the DNA actually shows. Before we get into it, hit that subscribe button. Every video here digs up the real origin of an animal you thought you knew. Let's begin. To understand the wolf, you have to go back to the Ice Age. The wolf is, fundamentally, an Ice Age animal, forged in a world that has since disappeared. During the last Ice Age, the Northern Hemisphere was a vast, cold expanse of open grassland known as the Mammoth Steppe, a frozen Serengeti that stretched from Spain across Europe and Asia and into North America. It teemed with enormous herbivores, woolly mammoths, woolly rhinos, giant deer, wild horses, and bison. And preying on those great herds was the wolf, already a superbly evolved pack hunter, ranging across the entire breadth of this frozen world. Wolves were one of the most widespread and successful large predators on the planet, a single, deeply interconnected population running from one side of the northern world to the other. These Ice Age wolves were not quite the wolves we know. The DNA reveals that the wolves of the Pleistocene were a diverse and widespread group, and crucially, they were highly connected across their entire enormous range. A wolf in what is now Siberia was genetically tied to wolves in Europe and in Alaska, the whole population mixing and flowing across the connected continents. They hunted the megafauna of the steppe, and they thrived in a cold, harsh world that rewarded intelligence, cooperation, and endurance. For tens of thousands of years, this was the wolf, the master predator of the Ice Age, woven into an ecosystem of giants. And then that world ended. The ending nearly took the wolf with it. Around the end of the last Ice Age, roughly 12,000 years ago, the planet warmed, and the Mammoth Steppe collapsed. The great herds of megafauna, the mammoths, the woolly rhinos, the giant deer, went extinct one after another in one of the largest waves of extinction in recent geological history. The world the wolf had been built for simply vanished, and the prey it depended on disappeared with it. The wolves were devastated. This is one of the most striking things the ancient DNA reveals. The wolf came through the end of the Ice Age as the survivor of a near catastrophe. The rich diversity of those ancient interconnected Pleistocene wolf populations was largely wiped out. Many distinct wolf lineages that had existed for tens of thousands of years simply ended, dying out alongside the great beasts they hunted. The wolves alive today descend from the survivors of that collapse, a fraction of the diversity that once existed. The lineage is lucky or adaptable enough to make it through the bottleneck when their entire world fell apart. So the gray wolf of today is not the unbroken, eternal king of the wilderness we imagine. It is a refugee, a survivor of an apocalypse that erased the world it was built for, and most of its own kind along with it. The modern wolf carries in its genome the scar of that near extinction, a narrowing, a loss, the genetic echo of a catastrophe 12,000 years deep. But buried in that story of collapse is an even stranger revelation, one that rewrites the origin of the dog entirely. Here is the part that overturns what everyone believes. Somewhere in that lost Ice Age world, before the collapse, one population of those ancient wolves did something no other animal had ever done. It came in from the cold. It approached the campfires of Ice Age humans, and over thousands of years, it became the dog. But, and this is the revelation, that population of wolves no longer exists. Ancient DNA shows clearly that dogs did not descend from any wolf alive today. Dogs and modern gray wolves are not parent and child. They are more like cousins, both descended from a common ancestral wolf population that lived in the Ice Age and has since vanished entirely. The actual wolves that gave rise to dogs were one of those lost Pleistocene lineages, a branch that split off to become the dog, while the branch that would have remained wild died out in the Great Collapse. The direct wild ancestor of the dog is gone. It is extinct. It survives only in transformed form, in the dog itself. Think about what that means. When you look at your dog, and then look at a gray wolf, and assume one came from the other, you are looking at two survivors of a vanished world, each descended from a third animal that no longer exists. The dog is not a tamed version of the wolf in the documentaries. The dog is the last living trace of a ghost, an Ice Age wolf lineage that walked into human firelight, transformed, and in so doing outlived its own wild kin. Your dog is, in a real sense, the only surviving form of an animal that has been extinct in the wild for over 10,000 years. And the DNA reveals one more wrinkle. The dog's origin is not even a clean single branch. The ancestry of dogs traces to more than one ancient wolf population, mixing in deep prehistory, the details of which scientists are still working to untangle. The birth of the dog was a complex, tangled event in a lost world, far stranger than the simple man tames wolf story we all grew up with. And here the story takes a turn into an animal that almost everyone has now heard of, and almost everyone misunderstands: the dire wolf. For most of the last century, the dire wolf was imagined as simply a bigger, more savage version of the gray wolf, the same animal scaled up, prowling Ice Age America and tearing down giant prey. Popular culture cemented the image, the dire wolf, as the gray wolf's monstrous big brother. And in early 2025, the dire wolf roared back into the headlines when a company announced it had brought the dire wolf back from extinction, producing pups it claimed were resurrected dire wolves, a story that went around the world. But the ancient DNA tells a far more surprising truth, and it is one of the best examples of how genetics overturns what bones alone seem to say. When researchers finally sequenced dire wolf DNA, they discovered that the dire wolf was not a true wolf at all. It looked like a wolf. It hunted like a wolf. It was shaped almost exactly like a wolf, but genetically it was only a distant relative. So distant that it belonged to an entirely separate lineage that had been evolving apart for millions of years. The dire wolf and the gray wolf were not close kin. Their startling similarity was the product of convergent evolution, two separate lineages independently evolving into nearly the same shape because they hunted in the same way, in the same kind of world. The dire wolf was a wolf in body, but not in blood. the last member of an ancient American canine line with no close living relatives at all. Which means the resurrection headlines deserve a careful asterisk. What modern science can do is take the genome of a living gray wolf and edit it to express some traits similar to the dire wolf, such as a larger size and a paler coat, producing an animal that resembles the dire wolf. But the true dire wolf, that was deeply separate, millions of years estranged from all living canines, is genuinely and permanently gone. The DNA reveals it as one of the loneliest branches on the whole canine tree, an animal we wrongly filed as a kind of wolf for over a century, when in truth it was something far older and far more alone, and its extinction closed an entire chapter of evolution that no gene editing can reopen. So if the dog left the wild and became our companion, what happened to the wolves that stayed wild? Their story, from that point on, is the story of one of the longest and most brutal wars our species has ever waged against another animal. Because once humans had the dog, the wolf became the enemy. For most of human history, across nearly every culture that lived alongside them, wolves were hunted, feared, and demonized, with a ferocity reserved for almost no other creature. As humans turned to farming and herding, the wolf became the killer of livestock, the threat in the dark beyond the fields. We wrote it into our darkest stories: the big bad wolf, the werewolf, the wolf at the door. We made it the very symbol of wild, predatory evil. And then we tried, methodically, to wipe it off the face of the earth. The persecution was staggering in its scale and effectiveness. Across Europe, wolves were exterminated from country after country over the centuries, hunted with traps, poison, and bounties, until they vanished from the British Isles, from most of Western Europe, from vast stretches of their ancient range. In North America, government-backed extermination campaigns in the 19th and 20th centuries killed wolves by the hundreds of thousands, deliberately driving them to near extinction across the continent, until only tiny remnant populations survived in the most remote wilderness. An animal that had ranged across the entire northern hemisphere, that had survived the end of the Ice Age itself, was brought to the brink not by climate or catastrophe, but by us, by the descendants of the very people its lost cousins had befriended at the fire. It is one of the great, bitter ironies in the history of life on Earth. We took one branch of the ancient wolf into our homes and called it our best friend, and we took the other branch and spent thousands of years trying to annihilate it. The same animal split in two, one curled at our feet, beloved beyond all others, the other hunted as a monster across two continents. The dog and the wolf are the two faces of the same lost Ice Age ancestor, and we have loved one and waged war on the other for the entire span of human civilization. And then, in one of the most remarkable reversals in the history of conservation, we changed our minds and discovered just how badly we had misunderstood the wolf's role all along. By the early 20th century, wolves had been completely exterminated from Yellowstone National Park, the last ones killed off by the 1920s. For 70 years, the park had no wolves at all, and on the surface it seemed fine. But beneath the surface, the ecosystem was quietly unraveling. With no wolves to fear, the elk population exploded and stopped moving. They lingered in the valleys and along the riverbanks, grazing the young willows and aspens down to nothing. The trees that lined the rivers vanished. The beavers, who needed those trees, disappeared. The riverbanks, no longer held together by roots, began to erode. An entire landscape was slowly degrading, and almost no one understood why. Then, in 1995, after decades of fierce debate, wolves were reintroduced to Yellowstone, and what followed became one of the most famous demonstrations in all of ecology. The wolves did not just reduce the elk numbers, they changed the elk's behavior. pushing them to keep moving, to avoid the open valleys where they were vulnerable. The willows and aspens along the rivers grew back. The beavers returned to use them, building dams that created wetlands. Songbirds came back to the recovered trees. Even the rivers themselves changed course less violently, their banks newly anchored by returning vegetation. Scientists call this a trophic cascade, the way a single top predator ripples down through an entire ecosystem, shaping everything beneath it. The wolf, it turned out, had never been the senseless villain of the fairy tales. It was a keystone, the animal that held the whole structure together, and whose absence had quietly let that structure fall apart. This is perhaps the deepest irony of all. For thousands of years, we cast the wolf as the destroyer, the monster that had to be eliminated for the world to be safe. And when we finally succeeded in removing it, we discovered the opposite was true. The wolf was not tearing the wild world apart. It was holding it together. The predator we feared most was, all along, one of the great architects of the living landscape. So pull it all together, and the real story of the wolf is nothing like the simple legend. The wolf is an Ice Age animal, the master predator of a vanished frozen world, once spread in a single connected population across the entire northern hemisphere. When that world collapsed at the end of the last ice age and the great herds went extinct, the wolf nearly went with them. Most of its ancient diversity wiped out, the modern gray wolf descending from the narrow band of survivors. And in that lost world, before the collapse, one now vanished wolf lineage walked into human firelight and became the dog, which means the dog did not descend from any wolf alive today, but from an extinct ghost lineage, making your dog the last living form of an animal gone from the wild for over 10,000 years. The fearsome, dire wolf that shared that world turned out not to be a true wolf at all, but a separate lineage millions of years estranged from all living canines, now permanently gone. And armed with the dog, we turned on the wolves that stayed wild and hunted them to the very edge of extinction, only to discover, when we finally brought them back, that the monster of our stories was in truth the keystone that held whole ecosystems together. What does this mean for the wolf and for the dog dreaming on your floor? It means the two of them are the split halves of one ancient story. A story of an Ice Age survivor that came through an apocalypse, divided into two destinies. One half gave up the wild, walked into our world, and became the most beloved animal in human history. The other half stayed wild and became the most hated and hunted, and then, at the last moment, the most quietly vindicated. Neither is the simple creature we imagined. The wolf is not the eternal king of the forest, nor the villain of the fairy tales. It is a refugee from a lost world, scarred by a near extinction we rarely remember, and the hidden architect of the wild. And the dog is not a tamed wolf. It is the ghost of one, the last surviving echo of an Ice Age lineage that no longer exists anywhere else on Earth. The next time your dog presses its head against your hand, remember what it actually is. Not a softened wolf, but the living memory of a vanished one. A creature that crossed out of a frozen, extinct world to be beside you, and that carries, in every cell, the story of an ancestor that exists nowhere now except in the animal at your side. If you found this story remarkable, there's more. The same ancient DNA that revealed the lost origin of the wolf can reveal where your own animals came from too. If you have a dog or a cat, we put together a plain English guide to reading their DNA results, what the breed percentages really mean, what the health markers are actually telling you, and the deep ancient ancestry hiding in the animal at your feet, traced all the way back to the vanished wolves and wildcats they descend from. It's the same science you've just watched, turned on the creature sleeping beside you. You'll find it linked in the description. And if you found this story remarkable, consider subscribing. There are more origins to uncover, and the DNA is only beginning to tell us what it knows.